Welcome to Body Kindness. I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, creator of the Body Kindness Philosophy book and audiobook. I'm here to help you create a better life by reinventing health from the body oppressive, shaming, and you'll never be enough type of mindset to positive and joyful ways that you can spiral up your energy, mood, and your well-being at any size, shape, or weight, and as you are right now. Get started for free at bodykindnessbook.com/start. That's the sound of me smashing a stack of scales in front of some friends. And I have to say that breaking up with the scale and all the other ways I was judging, monitoring, and measuring my worth was absolutely pivotal in my life. Creating the Body Kindness philosophy and letting myself be a human being again helped me become a better mom, a better clinician, and a happier and healthier person. I believe we all have a right to decide how we want to care for ourselves, and I think we all need support in figuring out what that looks like. You don't have to do this alone. There's a whole community of like-minded people who are fed up with diets, who are embracing intuitive eating, and who are completely redefining their lives from body shame to body kindness. You are not broken. Our culture is. Find your inner caregiver and create a better life with body kindness.
So now I think we see what I call the wellness diet as kind of the main manifestation of diet culture. And what the wellness diet is this sneaky modern guise of diet culture that pretends not to be about dieting. It's like, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change, but it's all about health and wellness. And you're going to get healthier if you cut out these foods, or you're going to get healthier if you stop eating sugar, if you're going to get healthier if you start intermittent fasting, or if you start doing keto, or if you do the Whole30. It's all these diets that say they're not diets, right? They say, it's like, even though a lot of people call it the keto diet, I've heard people say it's not really a diet, it's a lifestyle, even though it has diet in its name. Or there are people who would call it the keto lifestyle. Paleo considers itself like a template, not a diet. Template. Okay. Well, it's still a diet.
That was Christy Harrison, a Health at Every Size registered dietitian, certified intuitive eating counselor. She hosts a Food Psych podcast, and she's the author of the new book, Anti-Diet: Reclaim Your Time, Money, Well-Being, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating. I'm very proud to call Christy a colleague and also a friend. I love her book. It really addresses how diet culture is so deeply embedded in the fabric of society and how it's coded within the health, wellness, fitness, food, and media. We can't unsee it. It can be hard to recognize, especially in today's wellness culture. It can be very confusing and hard to spot. And from my perspective, it's also very hard to choose healthy self-care and well-being when everything is being hijacked by diet culture. Like, if you eat broccoli, you're going to lose weight. And if you don't lose weight, there's something wrong with you. So I really think you're going to get a lot out of my conversation with Christy. I'm so excited to have her back on the podcast. Make sure you check out her new book, Anti-Diet. Pick it up. Book, audiobook, ebook, however you get your books, wherever you get them. If you have questions about our conversation, you can ask me a question and I'll answer it on a future Body Kindness episode. That's bodykindnessbook.com/question. And I want to acknowledge that this can be a really tough time of year. Diet culture is everywhere. People are looking to make up for like having fun over the holidays, and you're not going to be able to unsee it. I want to let you know that if you're listening and you're having a hard time, that I'm sorry that you're struggling. You don't have to do this alone. I invite you to join us for free on Facebook, Body Kindness Insiders. Just answer a couple questions and I'll let you in. There's also the free Getting Started with Body Kindness at bodykindnessbook.com/start. And if you think it might be time for some one-on-one work, I do have some openings in my calendar. And the best way that you can get in on that is by shooting me an email. It's Rebecca@bodykindnessbook.com. Enjoy the show. Hey, Christy Harrison, welcome to Body Kindness.
Hey, Rebecca, thank you so much for having me. So excited to be back.
Yeah, I know. You were one of the few repeat performers on the podcast. So congratulations.
Thank you. Feels good.
Yeah, well, we have a lot to celebrate with the new book out and everything. Of course, we're going to talk about it.
Yay. I can't wait.
Yeah. But the way I usually like to start these conversations is by letting listeners know how I came to know my guest. And so for you, it was being a listener and lurker of your amazing podcast, Food Psych, and it helped me so much. I was writing Body Kindness and preparing to do the podcast thing, kind of jump into the fray, and really it was like it really wowed me, right? Because finding out that you were a dietitian, but having not met you through those traditional dietitian channels, networking events or Fancy or anything, to discover you like that and be like, this is my sister from another mister. I love her. So I don't know if I've ever told you that story about that impact, but it was one of those things where it was like, I love her and everything she's about. And I feel so much more confident about what I am about to bring out into the world. And it was just like, basically, I want to become her friend. And that eventually did happen because you were so gracious to let me guest on Food Psych when Body Kindness was first coming out in January 2017. And then how did we meet in person? I mean, through HAES and all those wonderful...
Some conference or something, I'm sure. Yeah. I love that, though. I love that you heard me on the podcast and were just like, I want to be her friend.
As you know, health at every size practitioners come to find each other and connect and build a sense of community. I was just just blown away by you and all the work that you've done. And I'll make sure listeners have a link to our original conversation, but it was one of my most popular episodes where I started sharing body stories. So it was when different people I asked, and you were one of them, to share like a letter to your body and about your experience. And yours was related to eating disorder and eating disorder recovery. And so I would love for you to start the conversation today by sharing with folks more about who you are and what you're doing these days. And then we'll kick it back into the backstory because I think your personal story is really interesting. And it's an important part. Like, I don't think Food Psych would be there or your book would be there if you didn't have the experience that you had in your life.
I so agree with that. I think, Food Psych and the book came out directly out of my own experience. So where I am today is I'm an anti-diet dietitian, a health at every size practitioner, and also a journalist. And I have more than 16 years of experience in journalism, and I started in food and nutrition journalism. It's kind of how I came to be a dietitian. And now I cover specifically health at every size, intuitive eating, and anti-diet stuff, and specifically calling out diet culture and all the sneaky places it loves to hide. So my new book, Anti-Diet, is actually the culmination of like 10 years of research. I first started working on a book proposal in 2010 that was going to be about a cultural history of emotional eating. That was the idea. And I had an agent interested in it. And I had just come out of working at Gourmet magazine. So it was sort of, I had like a lot of buzz around me. When they folded the magazine, everybody was sort of like, what are these editors going to do? And so this agent, kind of a hotshot agent, was like very interested in working with me. And I was working on this proposal, but it just wasn't coming together. There was just something about it that I couldn't crack that code. I couldn't crack the nut of like, what is this story really going to be? And I look back on it now with the book that I wrote now, and I realize like, it was a lot of the ingredients were there. I had a lot of the research, but I didn't know how to make sense of the research because it was so contrary to everything I had learned and everything I believed up until that point. It was so contrary to my own experience of disordered eating, where I thought that the solution was more control. And I was reading all this research showing diets don't work, that quote unquote emotional eating is actually a product of restriction, and that in the absence of restriction and dieting, we really don't see it that much in people. And I was just like, couldn't make heads or tails of it at the time. So I'm really glad that in that intervening 10 years, I was able to have my own full recovery. I was able to, which has a lot of privilege privilege attached to it, right? Like being able to afford to work with a therapist, having access to resources and to be able to have enough food in general, have access to the foods I needed to make peace with, all of that. So I was able to really heal my relationship with food and get back into intuitive eating. And then started working with clients to heal their relationships with food and to become intuitive eaters as well. And that really brought me in fully and squarely to health at every size in a way that I had 10 years ago. I'd heard about it. I sort of pushed back on it with a friend who first brought it up with me. I just wasn't totally ready. And so I think it was my own experience as both a person and a professional that brought me to this place of truly understanding and being rooted in the HAES model and being able to see diet culture for what it is, and like having that firsthand experience of being rooted and stuck in diet culture and coming out of it, that gave me a perspective to help other people do that and to just call out diet culture in every form.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point. Everything really is a matter of timing just in life, right? But especially in publishing, like I'm trying to imagine 2010 and what those meetings with publishers would have been like, because even though Intuitive Eating was a book that was out in 1995, in 2010, it's just, I can't imagine that. I mean, you weren't even where it was clicked, like this is the book I must write before I die. So not only were you not 100% there, but those editors and with what it was even going on in culture, it's like there was not the recognition that intuitive eating was scientific or helpful or important. And publishing is still to this day about sales. So I got to imagine that both of those things together, right? You kind of knowing that it's like there's something here and what is it exactly, and making an effort, but also the culture at the time, even in 2010, I mean, say it's 2 to 3 years to write the book. Yeah, we needed what you have out now in 2013. We needed it in 1995 when Intuitive Eating was out. We needed it before we were born.
Yeah.
But it is an issue of timing of when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So you have to go through a lot of stuff to get to something that now, I mean, I know as an early reader, it is going to be really profound and help, I think, a lot of people. So congrats.
Thank you. I know it was such a winding road to get here. And I mean, I really think about how grateful I am that I didn't write that book then, because my conclusion at that point, it was sort of emotional eating is this sort of culturally constructed thing. It seems like diets are actually the cause of emotional eating. The solution is to eat emotionally, quote unquote, the right way by knowing your farmer and like being in touch with the food. That was literally my and
Very
something
Michael Pollinish of you,
yeah.
I must say.
And at the time, I still was very much wanting to be the next Michael Pollan. He was a hero to me, and he was someone whose ideas that I followed really closely at the time, and was trying to reconcile this idea of healing people's relationships with food with the Michael Pollinish food systems approach. And on my book, I traced kind of how that worked and how subsequently I realized that's not really possible, that you can't actually reconcile those ideas really, because the food systems approach Michael Pollan and Marion Nestle and Eric Schlosser and their ilk pioneered is really built on a foundation of weight stigma. It's built on this supposed obesity epidemic rhetoric, this rhetoric of larger bodies are bad. If you want to shrink bodies, which is necessary for health, then we have to change the food system in order to do that. Quote unquote, processed foods are the reason that people are big, whatever. And so it's really antithetical, I think, ultimately to having a balanced and peaceful relationship with food. And there's definitely certain aspects of the food system and food culture that need to change. And that I think diet culture is really wrapped up in that. Diet culture is part of the food environment. And that's something that I think all of those folks really overlook when they're talking about the food environment.
Yeah. And it can also be really confusing, right? Like I'll just take one example of Marion Nestle, right? So she'll write and talk about things like what to eat, right? And very clearly good and bad food, or food politics. And it's like you against the man, right? And there's kernels of truth in these texts. And then it's like, you'll see her in this interview and well, I believe in a world where there should be potato chips and enjoy potato chips in moderation, right? But this thing that doesn't sound, it's like, well, wait a minute. are potato chips good or are they bad? Because you just went in to say that we're all eating too many chips and they're hyper palatable and that's why we have fat people in the world. And now you're saying that you believe in a world where we should be able to enjoy chips in moderation. Which one is it? So there's a lot of like gaslighting that has happened and is continuing to happen in diet culture.
Oh, completely. So much gaslighting. And it is that sort of like wanting your cake and eating it too, right? Wanting to be calling out the food system and telling people they're eating the wrong foods. But then when faced with the evidence that people are taking that message and it's doing harm, that people are taking that to a place of quote unquote extremes, which I really would argue even that message in and of itself is extreme. Even people don't have to take it to an extreme. It's already kind of extreme to say some foods are good and some foods are bad. It's challenging people's ability to have peace with food and their intuitive relationship with food that we're all born with. But when faced with the evidence that it's harming people, those kinds of messages are harming people, I think the approach from the food systems people is like, oh, no, like just be chill. Don't take what I'm saying to an extreme. I've heard Michael Pollan do that too. And it's frustrating because it's like, well, are you saying these messages, these black and white messages about food then because those are what sells and you're only sort of dampening them down when faced with the evidence that they're harmful? Or do you actually believe that food is bad, but you're sort of walking it back to try to avoid controversy or avoid harming people or avoid being accused of causing eating disorders? It is very confusing and very gaslighting. And I don't think intentionally. I don't think they're bad people. These people who are writing this stuff. Marion Nessel was lovely. I took classes with her. I even took a class with her. I even got some career advice from her. Michael Pollan was lovely. I interviewed him a couple of times. Like, I think they're trying to do the right thing. I think they just are completely unaware of this whole side of the picture when it comes to people's relationships with food and their bodies. And I think that's true of a lot of like privileged, thin white people who lead this food politics movement, this food activist movement. And I'm privileged and thin and white also, but I also happen to be someone who struggled in my own relationship with food. So I have that window into like the trauma that food policing can cause and the harm that causes to the clients that I've worked with and the other people that I know who've struggled in this movement. So I think we sort of need to be talking to each other. I think the food politics movement is built completely outside of and like unaware of the fact that disordered eating exists, that diet culture exists. And so that's to the detriment of that movement, because I think certainly we need greater food justice and access to food for people of all socioeconomic backgrounds, not because quote unquote processed foods are bad and make people fat, but because everybody deserves access to all kinds of food as a matter of social justice. And if we could approach it that way, rather than making it about certain foods are bad and people don't need to have them and body size is bad, larger bodies are bad, but just about like, no, really everybody deserves access to all kinds of food, I think it would be a much better movement. I think it would be a much less harmful movement.
Right, 100%. I mean, if just the more questioning and challenging we do of what was already in place that allowed me to gain more access to this power, and is there looking and reflecting on the harm without, it's almost like you want to turn away because you don't want to lose this power that you have, right? But like, imagine if the Michael Pollans of the world were examining just even white supremacy, right? So just examining that and the whole idea that the definition of the O words, right, literally are meant to mean to have eaten oneself fat. And that if that is not scientifically true, which you talk about in your book, so I want you to share some highlights of that, right? But if we can actually acknowledge that part of it is not scientifically true, then we can go back and challenge the language that we use, our assumptions we make about higher weight people, question the value of pursuing intentional weight loss, question the fact that it is even going to lead to better health. So it opens up what's kind of like maybe the breadcrumbs of Hansel and Gretel. Okay, I found this piece. Oh, now let me ask this question. And I think there's a lot more. I think social justice around food, health, and well-being can really be powerful and beautiful, but we've got to take weight, shape, and appearance out of the equation.
Absolutely. And like add in resilience to weight stigma and challenging of weight stigma too. Because I think we're in a position now where so many people have so much internalized weight stigma from the culture that it's like actively causing harm. Yeah. And so as a step to improving health, we need to help people take away that weight stigma and be resilient to it.
Yeah. And that is a project in and of itself, which maybe we'll get to in a little bit. But first, with respect to the book, what are some of the highlights you can share that might really kind of make a typical doctor scratch their head, or a typical person who has weight bias scratch their head, like related to the beliefs we have about higher weight people and what research is actually out there?
Yeah, so I think that the research that I really love to highlight is the research showing that weight itself is not the determinant of health we think it is, and that in fact, weight stigma and weight cycling can explain some or all of the increased health risks we see in people in larger bodies, right? Because there's this myth in diet culture that's like higher weight causes poor health, higher weight causes diabetes, higher weight causes being O-word, causes heart disease, diabetes, higher mortality rates, cancer, blah, 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 right? And that's just sort of taken as gospel in diet culture because of the pre-existing beliefs that we have. One of the things that I found really fascinating in my research for the book was the history of diet culture and the fact that actually concerns about weight from an aesthetic perspective and from a moral perspective predated by many years any concerns about weight related to health. Like doctors did not think higher weight caused poor health until the culture had already turned in a fat phobic direction, until fat phobia was already really baked into the culture and into fashion. And people started coming to doctors asking for weight loss diets. At first, doctors saw, like in the late 1800s, doctors saw people coming in for weight loss advice as a distraction from the real health concerns that they needed to be addressing. They saw it as mere vanity, distracting them from important things that they could be helping their patients with. And it wasn't until there was just a high enough demand, doctors getting asked again and again and again for weight loss advice, that they started to give the people what they want, right? Any business person in the face of high demand like that tends to do that. And so the idea that higher weight caused poor health really started to emerge in the early 1900s when fat phobia was already very entrenched. And so that's where we have all this research coming. Scientists are people too, I always say, right? So researchers are people too. The people who do the scientific research are products of culture, just like everyone else. And the questions that they ask in their research, the ways that they interpret correlations in their research, all of that has to do with culture more so than with quote unquote objective facts, because science is a method. It's not a set of immutable quote unquote objective facts. Scientists of their day used to think the earth was flat, right? And it wasn't until the scientific method advanced further and further that we got to the true notion that the earth is round. And I think that's really the same could be said here for issues of weight and health, because we see this correlation with higher weights and poor health outcomes, like higher rates of diabetes, higher rates of heart disease, sometimes higher mortality risk, although interestingly, quite a few studies show that people in larger bodies have lower mortality risk than people in the quote unquote normal BMI category or the quote unquote underweight BMI category, right? So that's sort of an interesting, interpreted in the scientific literature as a quote unquote paradox, but actually I think higher weight might actually be protective. But in terms of things like diabetes or heart disease, for example, we do see higher rates in people in larger bodies, but that could be explained by the fact that people in larger bodies have higher rates of weight stigma, which has been shown to be an independent risk factor for health, independent of body size, higher rates of weight cycling, which is yo-yo dieting, trying to lose weight and then ending up gaining it back, which is another kind of aspect of the research that I'll sidebar for a second, but basically almost everyone who diets or tries to lose weight intentionally ends up weight cycling. And weight cycling is another independent risk factor for your health that also raises people's risk of diabetes, heart disease, some forms of cancer, mortality. So the fact that we see higher rates of chronic diseases or other health risks in people in larger bodies may have nothing to do at all with the body size itself and everything to do with the fact that people in larger bodies are treated differently in our society, are discriminated against systematically, are denied jobs and healthcare, and just at every turn are made to feel bad about themselves. And we know that those things are a huge risk factor to people's health by creating stress, by adding to people's allostatic load, which is like the cumulative toll of chronic stress on the body, and by making them not able to access medical care. And when people don't have equal access to medical care, they end up sicker because they're not going to the doctor, because they're not getting the kind of care that they need. And so I think that's really, especially for any health providers listening, I think that's something that I really highlight as a takeaway, is that we don't actually have evidence that higher weight causes any poor health outcomes. We just have correlations, and correlation does not equal causation, as any freshman year statistics class will tell you, right? So it's the way that we're interpreting these correlations that's giving us this false idea that higher weight causes poor health. But we need to be looking deeper. We need to be asking tougher questions, and questions that are not rooted in weight bias. And I think when we start doing that, when we start looking at the effects of weight stigma and weight cycling, we'll see that the picture of the supposed picture of health that is thin, usually white, also cisgender, able-bodied, et cetera, really doesn't hold up. That really the reasons that people in that category, in those categories, have better health outcomes is because they face lower levels of discrimination and they have more privilege. And more privilege in our society begets better health. Unfortunately, that's just how it is in an inequitable society, the way we're living in now.
Yes, 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 and yes. And as you're talking, I'm writing all these, I don't know if it's comebacks, because they're not comebacks, because I agree with you, but I'm coming with my comeback anyway. With respect to the conversation around helping pros, there are kind of three key buckets that I thought of instantly as you were talking. And it's like acknowledging, like, number one, that being weight inclusive, health at every size informed, that's not how we were taught, right? So It's like they pick up Anti-Diet, they start reading this, and it's like, I mean, you had me at hello, right? When I was reading it on the beach this summer, which I highly recommend. Read it in just a magical place. Reading and highlighting and like, yes, rah, rah, rah. It's like, what do I think an average helping professional or maybe even someone who has like Kevin Hall, right? NIH researcher, right? Who's put out he does the latest hyperpalatability and food, you know. He's someone who needs to read this book. And I'm imagining him reading and his reactions. And it's like, A, you need to recognize this is not how I was taught. We all have that moment. And that there's a whole set of anger that we could have toward that. And also curiosity. Why was this not how I was taught? 2, well, my paycheck requires this weight suppression work. I mean, we all need our paychecks. We have bills. We need to eat. We have kids and family to support, right? And I'm in this system, right? So whether it's I'm a bariatric dietitian or I'm somebody who works in diabetes, and the program that I run is weight normative. And it's you feel a loss there, a blow there. What am I supposed to do? And then the third is more of like an upholder person, right? Well, like, I've got this power and this big leadership job and this power that I don't want to lose. And I'm thinking recently about, you probably heard about this, but Dr. Sharma posted some blog or something, and it was basically like the membership organizations for dietitians need to get control of their dietitians because you're being biased, not helping your people lose weight. And I'm reading this and I'm just like, woohoo! This and that's who I'm thinking of when I write that third point, right? It's like you are so challenged by the idea that individuals who are helping professionals in our culture are realizing that there's a problem with the systems and structures, that the research is showing something that's not in line with weight equals health, and that we're actively trying to learn and grow and treat people better. And your response is, we all suck. We're a bunch of, for lack of a better word, angry bitches. And and our membership organization should get control of us. And I think that there are people in that third bucket.
Oh, so agree. I mean, I think it's it really is challenging to the status quo and to the power structures that be. And when people have power in this system, and then people like us and other anti-diet dietitians are challenging the system, it threatens their livelihood, it threatens their approach, it threatens like everything that they've worked for, they've built their entire career upon. And I think there's sort of multiple ways you can go with that. I think there are the people who, I mean, I myself, like, granted I was early in my career, but I switched over from being a weight normative dietitian to a health at every size dietitian because of the evidence and the research that I was reading. And I think there are so many people, I mean, you had that experience, like so many of our colleagues have had that experience of being open to it, or maybe being totally closed off and not open to it at first, but having enough evidence mounting and paying attention and sort of having something in the back of our mind going, okay, I need to take this in. I need to actually look at what this research is saying instead of just digging in my heels and staying the course of the weight management paradigm that I know. And then there are other people, I don't know what makes the difference between these two camps, but there are other people who dig in their heels and say, that's not right. I'm going to fight it till the end. This health at every size anti-diet paradigm is harmful, and I'm going to do everything I can to stop it. And that's the people like Dr. Sharma that you're talking about, and many people I've encountered as well, who just are flatly refusing to hear the evidence. And it reminds me of that Gandhi quote. I know someone brought this up in the Health at Every Size therapist and nutritionist group we're a part of recently, where it's like Gandhi said, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And I was talking, I think, with Deb Regard recently. I have an episode with her coming out on the podcast soon too, about this. And we were saying, like, I think we're in the place where they're fighting us. I think this is the moment where it's gone. Health at every size and the anti-diet paradigm have gone far enough and made enough waves that now people are paying attention in the traditional weight management paradigm, and they're fighting us. They're mad. Mm-hmm. And that is like a phase we have to go through in order to get to the other side, in order to get to a place where we don't need to have a trademarked paradigm that's called health at every size, because then every health professional just practices that way. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that's possible. I just think it's going to take a lot of fighting and a lot of effort from many, many, many people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's that when I think of your book and the feeling I got from it, I mean, big, bold letters, anti-diet, like it's like, make no mistake, make no mistake where this book stands, right? Mm-hmm. And it did such an excellent job. The majority of the book really laying out a lot of the history and the research, and like so much sense making is what I felt when I was turning the pages, is it was like, you're taking people through this sense making of what was here before we got here, what we have been experiencing, and seeing the injustices and seeing the gaps, to that as long as you were interested and open, it's like right there. And it might be frustrating or challenging, or you might feel uncomfortable or difficulty, but it's that discomfort that I know you have felt, that I have felt. It's that discomfort that actually gets more conversations, more question asking, and ultimately more change. Because what we really need is every helping professional to read the book and also take an action on it. You know, if the most powerful decision-making helping professionals could read this book and see it as an invitation to learn and grow and to change, I mean, we will continue to see the type of culture that humans deserve, because it's inclusive and compassionate and caring, no matter how many fat cells people have, no matter somebody's health history or status, no matter how much money is in their pocket. And it really is essential. And I have to say, before I forget, the big feeling I got in reading it was, I think this is the new Health at Every Size book. Mm-hmm. And I think that's big, because reading Dr. Linda Bacon's book, Health at Every Size, was sort of that pivot moment for me. And when I don't even remember the year it came out. I don't know if you know. Do you know the year?
I think it was 2009, I want to say.
Okay. So that about makes sense, because I became a dietitian in 2007 and joined ASDA around that time. So it was, I was going through it and reading it, but that was a while ago. And I think that anti-diet really hits on a key element of where health at every size has been evolving and absolutely needs to evolve, and that has to do with intersectionality and social justice. So I would love for you to talk about how you address those very important topics in the book and why we have to have these conversations going forward.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, I want to say too that like Health at Every Size, that book was so seminal for me, and Linda Bacon's evolution over the years into more of the paying attention to the intersectionality and social justice aspects was one of the things that alerted me to how important that was. So, I think Linda's evolving in that regard too. And I know her new book is going to be going into a lot of that. So
good.
Yeah, the book that's coming out in like 2020, I think. But yes, for me, that was such a huge and essential part of this book, because when I started looking at the roots of diet culture, it's just so intertwined with other forms of oppression, other systems of oppression. Diet culture is a system of oppression that grows out of other systems of oppression like patriarchy, white supremacy, oppression of people who are poor, oppression of people with disabilities. It's just all the things, right? It sort of ties together all of these roots of all of these other systems of oppression. And it comes out of, Sabrina Strings, who I know you had on your show recently, does a really great job of articulating this in her book, Fearing the Black Body. So I would definitely recommend that as sort of a good basis for understanding all of this history. But basically, the idea that larger bodies were somehow bad or wrong really comes out of anti-Black and racist thinking from the 1700s and 1800s. And it started with the slave trade and sort of efforts to justify slavery, this idea of the great chain of being, quote unquote, which is this horrible, racist, backwards idea that like different races of people are at different levels on this great chain of being, with white people being closer to God. And then evolutionary biologists in the 1800s, early to mid 1800s, started sort of taking that up and applying evolutionary theory to it. And so saying like white European men are at the top of the evolutionary hierarchy, and then white European women are a step down from them, and then Northern European men and women, and then Southern European men and women are steps down from that, creating this bogus hierarchy with people of color at the bottom, specifically people from African origins or Native American origins. And like, what do you know? The people at the quote unquote bottom of the hierarchy are very much the ones that the Western, Northern European men doing the creating of this hierarchy had an interest in oppressing, had an interest in making out to be less than, right? Because slavery still needed to be justified, oppression of Native Americans, colonization. They're looking for these efforts to justify these horrible ways that they were oppressing and discriminating against people already. And larger body size started to get tied up in that because the evolutionary biologists doing these categorizing or creating these categories observed people's physical traits. There was a lot of attention to physiology, like the size of one's head. Phrenology came out of this period too. The idea that you could look at the shape of someone's head and determine their psychological status or their character. And, measuring the size of someone's nose, measuring the size of someone's ears, measuring the size of someone's breasts, and looking at body size and body shape became a huge part of this bogus categorizing of people. And so larger body size came to be associated with people of color and indigenous people, and smaller body size was supposedly associated with aristocracy and whiteness and like all things good, right? And so the idea that larger body size was bad really started to be spread by evolutionary biologists and given a sort of quote unquote scientific basis in the mid 1800s. And that's one of the ways in which diet culture started and fat phobic thinking started to get codified in Western thought. And so it really has its roots in this racist categorizing of bodies, in this misogynistic approach and view of bodies as well, because again, women were supposedly inferior on the evolutionary scale. And we see this as diet culture goes forward and emerges, that it disproportionately affects and oppresses people in already marginalized groups and women. So it disproportionately affects women. Women's supposed ideal body type is far thinner than women can naturally attain, and that comes directly out of these oppressive forces that create a diet culture. Diet culture and fat phobia also disproportionately affect people of color, people who don't conform with gender standards, right? And so really, intersectionality is this idea that systems of privilege and oppression intersect in our bodies, that we're not just walking around with one identity. We have multiple identities that can give us more or less privilege, expose us to more or less discrimination in our society. And so, for example, if you're a fat Black woman of color in Western culture at this point in history, you are going to be experiencing so much more injustice on so many levels, from difficulty getting a job to difficulty finding a partner who's not abusive, to difficulty getting healthcare and getting the kind of compassionate, evidence-based medicine that you need, more so than if you were someone who was thin, white, able-bodied, and male, right? And so I think that's really important. That was really an important aspect of writing this book, was to weave in the ways in which people's intersecting identities expose them to more harm under diet culture, and the ways in which diet culture in general is built on a foundation of oppression. And so when we buy into diet culture, even if I, as a white, thin, able-bodied, cisgender woman, don't experience the same fat phobia and weight stigma as I walk around in the world, if I'm buying into diet culture and if I'm spreading its messages and telling my clients to lose weight, I'm actually contributing to that system of oppression. I'm contributing to the oppression of people in all size bodies and all shape bodies and all genders, all ethnicities, by upholding this racist and misogynistic system of beliefs.
Yeah. And if seeing that and noticing that, it's like, that's a decision point, that discomfort of like, okay, what do I do now? Right? And you basically have two choices, right? Be open to learning and growing, knowing that it's uncomfortable, knowing that your clients are still going to come, sit down on your couch and say, I got to do something about this weight. That to sit with that discomfort of not having the answers, of not knowing, of realizing that you're part of a system that has been oppressing people for a really long time and is making a lot of mistakes, and that every time a BMI chart is pulled out, every time it's get on the scale, because these assessments are basically being used to make judgments and decisions about people's access to treatments and health insurance and big important things. And the way that these tools were created were also racist and oppressive. So yes, you will realize that it feels like everything is broken, and it is. And at the same time, it's a privilege to be able to choose to ignore it and throw up your hands and say, I can't do anything about it. And that is also the way that you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to continue to be an upholder of the oppression. Or you could stop and say, I'm confused and outraged, and I'm not sure what to do next, but I am open to figuring out what it is I need to do next.
Yeah. And that is a really uncomfortable place to be. I get it. Like, I know how these conversations about social justice bring up a lot of discomfort for people who have privilege, and having to look at your privilege is really hard. And having privilege doesn't mean you've never struggled. You know, I think that's something that I like to highlight too, because when I say something like I have thin privilege, it doesn't mean that it's good that I'm thin. It means that society treats me better because I'm thin. And that's actually an unearned privilege that I get human rights to respect and dignity and decency that everyone deserves, no matter their body size. And yet also having thin privilege and being able to move around the world without that discrimination from the outside doesn't mean that I've never struggled. As we talked about earlier, I had my own eating disorder history. I had my own issues with my body, of hating my body, wanting to be smaller, wanting to shrink it, thinking it was bad and wrong and quote unquote too big. So I get it that you can struggle and have your own internal battles and still be afforded all the rights and benefits that people with privilege are given in society that really everyone deserves.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So something else that I love and appreciate about the book, you talked a lot about the sneaky ways that diet culture is showing up today. So can you share a couple of highlights of some of the the sneaky ways that it's like, oh, is this diet culture?
Yeah, it's really interesting how sneaky it's become. And I think it's in large part because around the turn of the 20th century, people were realizing diets don't work. They were getting fed up with the conflicting nutrition information that was coming out. And I think the idea that permanent weight loss wasn't really possible for more than a tiny percentage of people was actually kind of out there in the news. I found newspaper articles about it and books about it, and people were talking about this in the late 90s. And so I think the diet industry was running scared. And so they sort of switched their tack and made themselves out to be no longer about weight loss, but about quote unquote lifestyle change, right? It's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change. And yeah, you'll lose weight. Like that's part of getting healthier. But really what it is it's about health. And that's when we also saw this O-word epidemic. The construction of that idea was around the late 90s and into the early 2000s is when it really took hold of the popular imagination. So now I think we see what I call the wellness diet as kind of the main manifestation of diet culture. And what the wellness diet is this sneaky modern guise of diet culture that pretends not to be about dieting. It's like, it's not a diet, it's a lifestyle change, but it's all about health and wellness. And you're going to get healthier if you cut out these foods, or you're going to get healthier if you stop eating sugar, if you're going to get healthier if you start intermittent fasting, or if you start doing keto, or if you do the Whole30. It's all these diets that say they're not diets, right? They say it's like, even though a lot of people call it the keto diet, I've heard people say it's not really a diet, it's a lifestyle, even though it has diet in its name. Or there are people who would call it the keto lifestyle. Paleo considers itself like a template, not a diet. Template. Okay. Well, it's still a diet. Like basically any of these words, these buzzwords that you hear, lifestyle, reset, reboot, template, plan, protocol, program, all of these things are just euphemisms for diet. They're just another word for a system of a regimen of behaviors and beliefs that has you cutting out certain foods, eliminating certain things from your diet, exercising in order to change your body size. And so it's really geared towards, even if it doesn't say it's about weight loss specifically, like I know the Whole30 specifically sort of de-emphasizes weight loss and says, you'll probably lose weight as a side effect of this, but that's not even the point, and you shouldn't pay attention to the scale. A lot of these diets do this, right? But the picture of health, quote unquote, that they're holding up is still thin, is still a certain body shape. It's hourglass shaped for feminine folks and triangle shaped for masculine folks. It's able-bodied, it's usually young, it's cisgender. It's all the things that the supposed picture of health in regular diet culture makes itself out to be, right? And so they're still selling you thinness and they're still selling you weight loss. It's just under the guise of it's going to be about health first and foremost. It's going to be about healing your gut or healing your relationship with food or healing your cravings, recovering from your cravings. And the weight will just fall off as a side effect of this diet. And that's just not true. We know that any path to weight loss that is changing your diet and your exercise in order to try to manipulate your body size, even if that's just a motivation in the back of your mind and it's not like the primary motivation, even if the primary motivation is, I want to stop my cravings, right? Or I want to feel better in my body, whatever that looks like. There's always that sort of back of the mind motivation of weight loss because we live in diet culture and that's just what every diet sells, every diet promises, right? In big terms or fine print, whatever it may be, it's still promising weight loss and we're still believing that weight loss is going to happen. And so when we engage in those diets, it doesn't work just like any other diet before hasn't worked. And we have decades worth of evidence showing that the only real weight loss that people experience with intentional weight loss efforts is short-lived. It's short-term. People end up regaining all the weight they lost within 5 years, 95 to 98% of the time. And 2/3 of the time, they end up regaining more weight than they lost. And so over time, weight loss efforts tend to make people's weight actually go up. Not that there's anything wrong with higher weights or larger bodies, but I think it's important to just sort of call out that effect because diets are selling one thing and creating the exact opposite effect. So when it comes to the sneaky forms of diet culture, I think anything that tells you to cut out certain foods or that certain foods are good and others are bad or healthy and unhealthy, quote unquote clean, quote unquote dirty, or processed, right? Whole versus processed. All of these dichotomies, I think, can alert you to the fact that something is a diet in disguise. Also, the promise that you're going to get quote unquote, get healthy, and that probably entails getting thin, right? Even if it's like, well, don't pay attention to the scale, but you will lose weight. Don't worry. That's a diet. It's just not telling you it's a diet.
I'm just sitting here cringing and wanting to curl underneath my desk, just thinking of all my experiences and clients and just the harm. And this is recent to where we're recording, and it'll be interesting to see how much future predicting I'm doing here by the time that this show airs. But I had so many, like my phone was buzzing and I was like, what's happening? And just several clients, and I saw it in a couple groups, were talking about how intermittent fasting. And I guess on today's show, Jenna Bush Hager and Hoda Kotb started like announcing that they were going to do an intermittent fasting challenge. And so I pulled up the headline, and it's like, talk about gaslighting, right? These two are such inspirations, right? And then I know, well, we're just going to see if it's worth the hype, right? Mm-hmm. So what did they do? It's day one. We kicked it off in a bold way because they weighed themselves on live TV, right?
God.
Like people are doing that every day as a form of punishment. Why are we normalizing this on television? Then the next line, well, the ladies aren't really focused on losing weight.
Oh my God.
Listen, in fact, we're just doing it, air quote, to be healthy.
Right. Of course.
Exactly what you were saying. But some forms of intermittent fasting are proven for weight loss. I mean, it's like whiplash, diet culture whiplash. This is exactly the gaslighting. And we need to know what is happening here is that they are trying to oppress us. They're trying to make us think that, hey, maybe this could be helpful to you. And we literally, our brains are getting this dopamine reward of like, maybe I should try it. And if I don't, I might lose out and I might miss out. And they were talking about how playful it was weighing themselves. And it's like, look at how much privilege I know. Isn't that weird? It's like, look at the privilege you have with your jobs and the security that you have for this, that you can go and do this. And they used numbers in the article as a like weight comparison. And then it's like, Jenna is like, I weigh more than I tell people and I weigh more than I should. And they're, but you just had a baby. Tomorrow we will wake up and the culture will still hate higher weight people. And we have to accept that and move on because people's lives are at stake.
Yeah. And I think cultural change happens so slowly. It's not like the Today Show or any morning show is about, it's the mainstream, right? It's sort of a very mainstream view. And it's going to probably reach the Today Show last. I mean, I'm hoping to be on the Today Show actually to get this message out there. So, that would be awesome. But I think in terms of actually sinking in and reaching people, I think like the message won't be baked in other than the sort of novelty of like, look at this new book. It's not going to be baked into everything they do right away. Any sort of mainstream publication, I think it takes a long time to turn that ship around in the face of new evidence and a new paradigm. I think where the change is going to happen is at the level of the people who are already listening to this podcast, who already care about this content, this information, or the people who are healthcare professionals who are open to learning a different way, who've recognized that their approach to patient health isn't helping, or that their clients who they see for weight loss aren't actually losing weight in the long term and are very frustrated. And the healthcare providers themselves are feeling very frustrated. I think it starts with the people who are already struggling under diet culture in some way or experiencing some form of oppression under it, whether that's oppression because they live in a larger body and are experiencing weight stigma day to day, or people who have this internalized belief system, the diet culture's belief system that's making them oppress themselves, even if they're not experiencing that systemic oppression from the outside. And so I think, it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be a weird cognitive dissonance moment every time you're like in this anti-diet space and feeling so good. And then suddenly you wake up and there's this horrible diet culture thing staring you in the face. And that happens to me all the time, like with the Weight Watchers Kurbo news that happened over the summer, or everyone any new celebrity who endorses intermittent fasting or keto or what have you. It's a little disappointment. It's a little stab in the heart. It's a little like sucker punch of like, all this stuff that I've been working for and this effort that I've been making still isn't making this kind of large scale cultural change. And I know that cultural change at the large scale has to come from individuals getting the message and changing their mind, and then being in positions of power and privilege at institutions that can then start to move that ship. I got asked to write about Weight Watchers Kurbo by a New York Times editor who was a listener to my podcast. That's how that came about. And the fact that someone in a position of power at that paper listens to the podcast and was able to reach out to me and get this message out there in a new way, and has done that with other people in the anti-diet movement and started to spread this message from that platform, I think is just one example of how this cultural change happens. And at the really subtle level, even if you're not someone who's in a position like that, and if you're just a parent, like teaching your kids a different way to view bodies, helping your kids push back on weight stigma and bullying that they experience, or helping if you're a healthcare provider who's not really like on social media or writing books or whatever, just counseling your patients in a way that is health at every size informed, that is not falling into diet culture, that is not oppressing them based on the size and shape of their body. That is a victory. That is a shift. That is a part of this cultural change that we need to see. And enough of that, I think, builds towards these larger moments where maybe one day, 20 years from now, or 50 years from now, or when we're both long gone, the Today Show or the Futurama Tellerific show, whatever the hell it's called then, will have a segment on like why dieting is bad. And that's just going to be baked into their whole framework. So I think it just takes a lot of consistent effort over time by many, many people. And the more people get this message and start helping, the better.
Yep. And just no matter what you see, right, around the new year or whatever, because we know those things are going to be there, know that you can opt out. And opting out isn't necessarily easy, but there are tools, and they can read Anti-Diet, right? They can have one conversation at a time and just start the process of opting out is good enough progress as well.
Absolutely. And listening to podcasts like yours and mine and surrounding themselves and reading Body Kindness and like surrounding themselves with all the anti-diet literature and content that exists, I think is a really great start also to like fighting back against all that content that's going to be out there this time of year, because it is, and we just have to like let it roll off us.
Well, Christy, you've been wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Everyone should go out and get Anti-Diet, subscribe to Food Psych. Where can people find and follow you as well?
Yeah, so people can find me on my website, ChristyHarrison.com. If you go to ChristyHarrison.com/book or just click on the book link in the navigation, you'll get all the information about my book, where to order it. You can also find it at bookstores everywhere. And yeah, my information about the podcast is on my website as well. And you can follow me on social media and all the things. So
thank you so much for coming on the show today. And thanks for being you.
Thanks for being you.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.